All right, let's dive into ancient Rome.
Mm,
We've got the history-rome.pdf as our guide.
a classic.
It is, and it's packed with stuff you just wouldn't believe about their history and their culture.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking family dramas, laws that are more like contracts, wild stuff that, believe it or not, actually shaped Western civilization as we know it.
It's amazing how these things connect, isn't it?
It really is. So, first up, the Roman family.
Buckle up.
This book dives deep into the power of the paterfamilias,
Yeah.
the head honcho, the dad with, like,
All the power.
ultimate authority
Legal, judicial, life and death decisions.
over everyone in the family.
The whole shebang.
Can you imagine that today?
Not a chance. I mean, could you imagine?
I can't even fathom. And get this. They say fathers could even sell their kids.
Legally.
That was going on in ancient Rome.
Well, gotta remember, this wasn't seen as cruel back then. It was just how things were. But even the practice of exposure, abandoning unwanted children,
Right.
that actually changed over time.
So it wasn't always a thing.
It went from like a legal punishment to a religious no-no.
So less about the law, more about beliefs.
Precisely. The book shows how even that immense paternal power, it shifted with the times.
Interesting. So was this like just a Roman thing, the super dad situation?
Extreme, yeah, but patriarchal societies weren't uncommon back then.
Makes sense.
But the Roman way, it was so rigid, legally defined.
Wow. Okay, from strict families, let's jump to Roman law.
A whole other world.
This book says early Romans didn't see law as like orders from the king.
Nope.
More like a two-way street, a
A
contract.
contract. Wild, right?
For ancient Rome, that sounds almost progressive.
It does, doesn't it? And the book has these great examples.
Like what?
Wills, for instance.
Okay.
Letting someone pass on property after death that needed community buy-in
Why is that?
went against the norm of immediate inheritance. It was a big deal.
Oh.
So it wasn't just the king saying, do this. It was like an agreement.
We the people kind of thing.
Exactly. And there's this practice,
What now?
abrogatio, where someone could like give up their freedom to another person.
Whoa, seriously.
Seriously. But again, community had to agree, so it's more a contract than a force.
Mind-blowing. So this Roman law thing, it wasn't just about power from above.
Nope, much more nuanced.
And you said it influenced our modern systems. How so?
Big time. They're focused on contracts, rights, procedures. That's the bedrock.
Oh,
Legal systems all over Europe, beyond. Due process, written law, all that jazz.
wow, the toga-wearing lawmakers of yore shaping us today.
It's pretty wild when you think about it.
It is. Now, before we hit Roman justice, let's talk about the city itself.
The heart of the empire.
This book says Rome was formed through synokismos. What's that?
Synokismos, basically merging communities into one big city.
Like a city-sized merger.
Exactly. It's how tons of ancient cities came about, Rome included.
And the book specifically talks about the Palatine and Quirinal settlements joining up.
Yep, prime example. And the cool part is, they often kept bits of each original community, like duplicate religious institutions.
Really?
Imagine merging towns and having two of everything, religiously.
Double the gods, double the fun.
Maybe, but it shows a certain pragmatism, keeping the peace, blending traditions.
Interesting. Maybe that open-mindedness was part of their success.
Could be.
Speaking of open, let's talk Roman justice. This book says their trials were super public.
Oh yeah, public trials, front and center.
Like a reality show.
Kinda. The king was the judge, senators chimed in, but guess what?
Oh.
No juries.
No juries. How they decide anything.
Community pressure, peer pressure, imagine that. Everyone watching, your reputation on the line.
Intense. So less about legal proof, more about public opinion.
It seems that way, yeah.
And this book, it mentions some pretty hardcore punishments.
Oh yeah, they weren't messing around.
Like what?
Stealing crops, hanging, arson, burn alive.
Yikes. Strong deterrence indeed.
Absolutely.
So compared to other ancient systems, was Roman justice, like, extra brutal?
Tough to compare exactly. Systems varied a lot back then.
Right.
But Roman justice, it definitely leaned towards harsh, especially for public order offenses.
Don't mess with Rome kind of vibe.
You got it.
All right, let's switch gears, get spiritual. This book calls their religion surprisingly practical.
Very much so.
Meaning?
It was about achieving stuff, good harvest, protection, victory in battle, practical stuff.
Less philosophy, more help us out, gods.
Exactly. And they had this practice, vowing oneself.
Okay.
Basically, self-sacrifice to appease the gods or avoid disaster.
Whoa, intense. Was that, like, voluntary?
Mostly, yeah, driven by this belief that sacrificing could benefit everyone.
Makes you think. And there's also this sacred spring ritual mentioned. What's that about?
A bit unclear, honestly. Seems like newborns were dedicated to the gods.
Dedicated how?
Not sure exactly. Maybe a symbolic thing, recognizing the gods' role in life and fertility.
Interesting. But the book also says they weren't as into ghosts or the supernatural as some.
Right, compared to, say, the Greeks.
Oh.
Romans seemed way more grounded in the here and now.
While the Greeks were off with the underworld, the Romans were building stuff.
In a nutshell, yeah. That practicality might be key to understanding their success.
Could be. But before we go full-on pragmatism, let's talk about the Roman calendar.
Everyone loves a good calendar.
Right. This one had its quirks. Day and month, that was their main thing at first.
Simple, right? Sun's up, new day, moon does its thing, new month.
Makes sense.
But then they got into the duodecimal system, 12 months.
Solar year thing.
Exactly. They were figuring out the sun takes about 12 moon cycles for its whole trip.
And unlike a lot of things they got from the Greeks, they made their own monk names.
Independent Street.
It's like, we'll take your philosophy, but we'll track time our way.
Haha, exactly.
But honestly, syncing up lunar and solar cycles? That sounds tricky.
It's a puzzle. That 29.5-day moon cycle versus the 365 and a bit day solar year.
Not for the mathematically challenged.
Nope. The Romans, like everyone else, had to tweak and add leap days to make it work.
Calendar math. Respect. Okay, that's a wrap for part 1 of our Roman deep dive.
So much packed in already.
Family, law, city building, justice, religion, even calendars. They did it all.
And we've only just begun.
Back for more Roman adventures. Last time, calendars, right? They had their own way of tracking time.
They did, but just like with the calendar, their alphabet, it's borrowed, but with a Roman twist.
Gotta love that Roman twist.
It's a classic. So you can't talk Romans without talking Greeks.
Ah, the Greek.
Huge influence, and their alphabet, well, Rome got it secondhand.
Secondhand.
Yeah, through traders, probably from places like Cumae or Tarentum, these middlemen.
So like a cultural whisper down the lane.
Kinda. The book points out both the Etruscan and Latin alphabets based on Greek, but each evolved differently. Sounds for isers, K-signs, even writing direction, all different.
Fascinating how those little things make a big difference.
They really do. Oh, and speaking of weird twists, early Etruscan writing.
What about it?
It supposedly looked like a coiled snake.
A snake. Seriously.
Imagine trying to decipher that. Talk about a different writing experience.
Makes you appreciate our simple letters, right?
No kidding. But let's talk about literacy itself. Was it just for the elite or what?
Yeah, who could actually read and write back then?
You might be surprised. The book suggests literacy was pretty widespread in early Rome.
Really? Even among, like, regular folks?
Even slaves, apparently.
Wow, I was pictured it as a rich and powerful thing.
It's a common thought, but think about it. A society like Rome, it needs more than a handful of readers.
True.
And there's mention of schools in the forum, kids learning young, that suggests it was valued widely.
Kids in the forum, practicing their ABCs. So why do we know so little about this early period then?
If they were writing, shouldn't there be records galore?
Good point.
The book suggests it might not be about lack of writing, but lack of interest from later historians.
Huh. So they just didn't care about everyday Roman life.
Maybe. They were focused on big events, wars, politics, that kind of stuff.
Makes sense, the juicy stuff.
Exactly. Or maybe those earlier records, they're just lost, gone forever.
It makes you wonder how much history we're missing, right?
It really does. Like, whose story gets told and what gets left behind?
Big questions. Okay, enough about words. Let's get concrete. Literally Roman architecture.
Those Romans, they knew how to build.
They did. This book talks about how practical it was, thanks to those Etruscans.
Etruscans again. Arches, vaults, concrete built to last.
So they weren't just writing like snakes, they were building like them too.
All those curves. But yeah, huge impact on Roman architecture. Later, they brought in Greek stuff too.
Like what?
Columns, marble, all fancy, but always with that Roman practicality at heart.
This mix and match approach, it created something uniquely Roman, didn't it?
Absolutely. And you know, those Romans, they weren't all work and no play.
Roman entertainment, time for some fun.
They knew how to have a good time. The book talks about the importance of music and dance, especially in their religious stuff.
So even their rituals had a party vibe.
Kinda. They had the Sali, the leaping priests dancing in full armor.
Wow.
And the Collegium Tibicinum Guild of Popers providing the tunes.
It's amazing how music and dance are, like, universal across time.
They really are. But as Rome grew, bigger, more urban,
Yeah.
their tastes changed. They brought in Greek theater, but also developed their own thing.
Their own thing.
Gladiator games.
The gladiator games. Blood sport, Roman style. Hard to imagine that as entertainment today.
Times change. But let's rewind to those Greek theater productions.
Oh.
Did they just copy-paste or what?
Good question.
It's a bit of both. The book mentions guys like Livius Andronicus, Naevius, Plautus.
Playwrights.
Yep, they translated, adapted, but also wrote their own stuff. Roman history, mythology, all that.
So Greek inspiration, but with a Roman spin.
Exactly. Not just consuming, but shaping, making it their own.
Fascinating, this cultural back and forth.
It really is. But let's get practical again. What were they writing on back then?
Not laptops, I'm guessing.
Nope. Leaves, bark, wooden tablets, leather, even linen, they used it all.
Leaves and bark. Sounds fragile.
Not exactly archival quality, but the book mentions the Samnites, their sacred records were on linen rolls.
Linen scrolls. Imagine that.
It shows how much they valued writing, preserving knowledge, even with what they had.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So from leaves to linen, did they ever develop a taste for, say, tragedy?
Oh, they did. Roman comedy was huge, but tragedy held a special place too.
So it wasn't all laughs and gladiators.
Nope. Tragedy explored big stuff, fate, morality, all that, often with Greek myth inspiration.
Serious stuff.
Definitely. And just like with comedy, they adapted those Greek tragedies to fit Rome.
Always adding their own flavor.
Exactly. Sadly, not many Roman tragedies survive, so we're missing a lot.
A literary puzzle with missing pieces.
It is. Speaking of puzzles, the book mentions this writer, Quintus Ennius.
Ennius, what's his deal?
He wanted to tell Roman history, but epic poem style, like Homer.
Roman Iliad?
Kinda. Battles, heroes, gods intervening, the whole shebang. Hexameter verse, the works.
Wow, creating a Roman mythology.
He was. But there's this unusual side to him, too.
Unusual how?
His work, it shows Pythagorean and Hellenistic influences, the way he portrays gods, the soul.
So poet, historian, philosopher, all rolled into one.
A true Renaissance man, way before the Renaissance.
Ahead of his time. Okay, let's shift gears. Talk Roman economy.
Money talks, even in ancient Rome.
It does. The book talks about a big shift from farming to trading. What happened?
Empire grew, new cultures, new opportunities, trade routes booming.
They discovered the joys of shopping.
Haha, kinda. Spices, fabrics, all these luxury goods flowing in.
And to handle all that, you need a good system, right?
You do. Enter coinage. The book explains how they introduced silver coinage, standardized it across Italy.
Before that, it was just a hodgepodge of local currencies.
Imagine the chaos. This standardization, it made trade smooth, unified the regions.
One empire, one currency kind of deal.
Exactly. But running a vast empire like that, it had its challenges.
Like what?
Logistical nightmares. Roads, armies, taxes, resources, plus inflation, corruption, war threats.
Not an easy job.
And, as the empire grew, the wealth gap probably widened too.
The rich get richer.
The book talks about how small farmers struggled, lost their land, went to the cities for work.
That's a familiar story, sadly.
It is economic expansion. Some win, some lose.
That's it for part 2, folks. Alphabet 2 economy, we covered it all.
A whirlwind tour of Roman life.
Final part of our Roman deep dive. We've been through family life, laws, buildings, religion, entertainment, the economy, even their love-hate thing with Greece.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. And now let's think big picture, What can we say about their values, how they dealt with power, all that?
Good questions. And this source, it really digs into the whole land ownership thing.
We talked about that, how land equaled wealth, but it seems like it was more than just money to them.
Way more. It
Yeah.
was tied to their Roman identity, belonging, even civic duty, the book says.
So losing your land, it was like losing a part of yourself, your Romanness.
Exactly. And the source talks about how Roman leaders, they knew this.
So what do?
They encouraged the wealthy to invest in land, like it was a patriotic duty.
Interesting.
And even freedmen, former slaves, they got special perks if they owned property.
Trying to preserve that connection, land and being Roman, even as things changed.
It was a big deal to them.
It makes okay, let's talk Greece for a minute. We've mentioned them a lot, but what was the real Roman attitude? All admiration, or was there some rivalry there?
It's complex, the book says. They clearly respected Greek culture, saw it as sophisticated,
Yeah.
but also this need to compete, to prove they were just as good or even better.
Like that sibling rivalry thing.
Totally. Admiration, competition, it's all through Roman history.
We learn from you, but we're doing it our way, kind of thing.
You got it. The source even mentions this funny story. This Roman general
What at him?
insisted on being called Aeneas, a Greek-sounding name, instead of a proper Roman title.
Trying a little too hard, maybe.
Haha, maybe. But it shows how deep that Greek influence went, even if sometimes it was a bit awkward.
Okay, last big topic. The downsides of Roman power. All that conquering, it had to have a dark side.
The source doesn't shy away from that. Corruption, greed, especially among officials out in the provinces.
Power corrupts, and with a giant empire, well, the temptations must have been huge.
They were, the book says. Roman governors, far from Rome, they had tons of power, and many abused it.
Exploiting people, taking what they could get.
Sadly, yeah. And the source emphasizes how Rome struggled to control this.
How do you keep tabs on everyone across a giant empire?
Exactly. It wasn't easy, and this corruption, it wasn't just a moral problem.
I mean,
It undermined Roman authority, made people resent them. Some even say it led to their downfall.
power without accountability, it's a recipe for disaster.
It really is a lesson for any leader, anytime.
So that's it, the end of our Roman deep dive. Family to corruption, we've covered a lot.
We have. Hopefully you've all gotten a glimpse into this amazing civilization.
We just scratched the surface, but hopefully it's made you appreciate the Romans. They're good, they're bad, their struggles.
They were complex, that's for sure.
And what's incredible is how much we can still learn from them, even now.
Their successes, their failures, it's all relevant.
Absolutely. So before we go, one last thought for you all to ponder. We've talked about how much Rome took from Greece,
Right.
but what if it had been the other way around? Greece adopting Roman ways. Would they have built an empire like that? Would they have lasted as long?
Now that's a question.
It makes you think about what made Rome unique. That mix of practicality, ambition, and, let's be honest, a bit of ruthlessness.
A potent combination for sure.
It was. Thanks for joining us on this Roman adventure, everyone. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into history. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.